Welcome to They Live By Film, a film discussion podcast focusing on the Criterion Channel and beyond. My name is Adam Lundy, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Chris Haskell and Zach Bryant. How are you doing, guys?
Ooh, so excited to get into this one, Adam. These films are fun to talk about, especially Revengeance.
Uh, there are you, Zach.
I'm good. Here to
Good to
also talk about Revengeance.
hear. We're all here for Revengeance, so we'll get there. We'll get there. So we're going to start off with obviously the first film that we watched 2 weeks ago, and I'm probably going to mess up the pronunciation. Monsieur Hulot's Holiday. I'm not going to try the French title for it. So this was a 1953 French comedy film from Jacques Tati. This was my first Tati film. I don't know if you guys had seen a lot of Tati films. Maybe I just need to warm up to his style. Um, what did you guys think of this? Did you like it? Not like it? We'll start with Chris. What about you?
Yeah, I grew up watching Mr. Bean and sort of found out about Jacques Tati. Just I love Mr. Bean when I was 10 and 11. It was just perfect. And so yeah, I found out about Jacques Tati actually quite early. He was a huge influence on Mr. Bean, and so I've had this Criterion box set. As soon as they put it out, I picked it up and kind of been through most of the films, exception of one or two. But I love it, and yeah, I'm excited to get into this film a little bit. I think it's definitely one of those films that gets better on rewatch for sure. But what about you, Zach?
It's a little strange because, and I just put a little background for me. I'm not a big comedy fan. If you go through any of my collection, I don't watch a lot of comedies. It's something they rarely ever really catch my attention. And really, this one wasn't much different. I felt okay about it. There were some segments I really enjoyed. I did feel like it dragged a lot, and some of I don't want to call them segments because that kind of makes it sound like an anthology, but it kind of was set up that way in its own way. Um, but there were moments I liked, and I think I can have the appreciation for it, but it didn't really make me feel like to go watch more of that type of film. I guess if that makes sense.
I think I'm definitely more in your camp, Zach, than Chris. Like again, I'm not offended by it. It was absolutely fine. There was a lot of moments that were enjoyable, but again, there's the term I keep coming back to when I think of this film, and please don't put me on a stake. I don't mean this in a bad way at all. It's just the best way I can describe it. It's sort of like all sizzle, no steak, or all style, no substance. The film looks incredible. That's the one thing. The framing is so good for so much of this film. The framing, the camera work, the direction is all really, really good. But like, there's no plot, there's no development. It's Jacques Tati basically goofing off for an hour and a bit, and that's fine. And I'm glad you brought up Mr. Bean, because I was actually going to ask you guys if Mr. Bean had aired in the States. I know obviously, Chris, you sort of grew up a bit in the UK, so that's probably where you got Mr. Bean from.
Yeah.
Do you know who Mr. Bean is, Zach? Have you ever heard of Mr. Bean?
Yeah, there were movies here. I think there was one, I don't know, about 10, 15 years ago, maybe.
Mhm.
And he played in Rat Race, which I watched a lot as a
Oh
kid.
yeah,
Yeah.
Rowan Atkinson, the actor. Yeah, it was Rat Race, and funnily enough, Mr. Bean. It was Mr. Bean's Holiday, which no doubt got its title from this film as well,
Yeah.
because obviously they're both set at a French seaside town, and obviously Mr. Bean is essentially Mr. Hulot as well. They're pretty much very similar characters. But yeah, for this one, for me, and honestly, I just didn't really find it that funny. We call it a comedy, but it wasn't. Maybe it's just not my style, but I didn't really find it that funny. I didn't really laugh out loud. There was parts that I found humorous, but for me, the film is very stylish, and I cannot fault Tati for that. The film is very stylish in terms of its direction and its camera work. It looks really nice, but there's just not enough. There wasn't just enough meat on the bone for me to really sort of dig it.
All right, so I'm going to make my defense for Tati. Okay. And I'll be as concise as I can. But here's the thing: I just, on a total coincidence, was recommended to see The Illusionist, which is a 2010 film by it was the film right after Triple to Belleville, if y'all remember that one, which was just fantastic. And so this was the follow-up film to that from that director, Chomet, and he was a lifelong fan of Tati, and actually so Jacques Tati's name is Tatishev. He's actually a Russian guy and shortened it to Jacques Tati. And when he, so this was a script that he had written but never made. So Chomet came 30 years later and made The Illusionist, which was the mind of Jacques Tati. And it's all about the dying artist, right? The variety artist, the entertainer, the clown, the mimes, these old, like forgotten forms of kind of entertainment that has moved on as the world's moved on. And so I guess there's a romantic notion for me around Tati because I could see in his like, in his soul, in his heart, he wants to create this legacy of this old style, this kind of Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton style of, a lot of setup going into the scenes. I think I would defend them as doing it better. So I'm definitely in the camp of like, their stuff is actually really laugh out loud funny. Whereas I agree with you, I don't think this is quite hilarious. I think it's more just kind of charming and whimsical. And this was so, but in that spirit of somebody who's really like painstakingly sorting through the prep and the kind of getting these scenes ready to go. There's just one scene that really jumps out to me where he's sitting in a boat and there's a can of paint next to the boat. And I don't know if he has a string attached to the can or if he somehow was able to actually time the waves, but the can goes out and it comes back. And as soon as it comes back, his paintbrush is in there as if he doesn't know, like, he's completely unaware. The character is completely unaware that it ever moved. And then at one point it's on the other side of the boat. And just when I think about this, how much prep goes into a simple scene like that, it's just sort of a style of entertainment we don't really have anymore. And maybe y'all would argue for good reason if it's not funny. But that's my defense of Jacques Tati and his character Hulot is that he it kind of in his spirit, in his soul, is this old style of entertainment, and I appreciate it for that and for his defense of and preservation of that style of comedy. So that's my defense of Hulot's Holiday, is it fits in that. And it was his first film, so there's probably some holes and gaps that he got tighter as he went along as well. I think Playtime is much more revered because he got better as a filmmaker. So
I did sit down and read Roger Ebert because he seemed to be very passionate about this movie, and he had I loved his review. I sat down and read that this morning after I finished the movie just because I really felt like I was missing something. I've seen the great reviews for it, and I think he summed it up well. I don't have his exact review up, but he kind of talked about that it was almost like a nostalgia thing for him, like the feeling of going to the beach. And I feel like that's really what this film is, I guess, trying to capture. And maybe it's part of me not really growing up going to the beach or stuff like that. And it doesn't quite capture it for me. But I do agree with you that it's a completely charming movie. And there are great parts. I love the part on the canoe where he ends up looking like a shark. I thought that was actually a pretty great part. The tennis match was interesting. It was, I mean, I was engaged in that part, and then, as you mentioned, Adam, I really did like the photography. The nighttime scenes. There was one, I think it was a lighthouse. I'm actually starting to forget which part it was, but the light of the lighthouse and how well all the nighttime scenes, even though there's very few of them, were always really good. So there's definitely a lot to appreciate. It just didn't capture what I would have liked for it to, for me.
Yeah, no, I suppose I have to feel like I have to sort of go back on what I said a little bit, but not really. I do massively respect Tati for the film he created as a director, as a creator. Like, a lot of work went into this film. You can tell a lot of work went into, as you were saying, Chris, with the timing of the gags and everything like that. Yeah, but there's just not enough plot for me there to love it. Like, as you were saying, sorry. In regards to comparisons to, say, Buster Keaton or Harold Lloyd, or less so Charlie Chaplin, he was less sort of into that kind of humor. But like, those films had really good plots going for it as well, whereas this one is definitely more like an episode of Mr. Bean, because it's just him flouncing around for, well, at least with an episode of Mr. Bean, you're in and out in 20 minutes. So it's there's that time for. It's okay that he just sort of bounces around for 20 minutes because there's no real stakes involved, but it does, like, I was getting bored towards the end, I'm not going to lie, because I was thinking, okay, he set up this sort of film with all these colorful characters, and they're seemingly all sort of members of the bourgeoisie, and maybe there's going to be some kind of political undertones here or something. But it was just like, nah, these lads are just on holidays.
Which, speaking of that, I did catch like, and this was right. I'd say only the last half of the film. There were two parts where they do bring up like almost like this criticism of the bourgeoisie. Like one of them's in the background. And I only caught it because it's in the subtitles. And then there's the guy who tries to flirt with the girl, and he starts talking about it too. Is there is there more to that? Because I don't have a lot of context for French era 1953, so maybe I'm missing something. But
like
I just
from
thought
what
it
I
was kind of
was,
out of left field.
yeah, no, like from what I was reading, that was definitely something because obviously this is all post-war, and it's all very about sort of the rebuilding of the economy and everything like that. So apparently there was a lot of subtext for it. I didn't get a whole lot of it. The sort of one that jumped out to me the most was the guy. He seemed like a stockbroker or some kind of businessman who was constantly being called into the phone to
Hmm.
sort of take business meetings despite him being on holiday. That was the one that sort of jumped out the most at me as being, some kind of commentary towards, you know, sort of the economy and sort of the booming after that. So even though these people are all on holiday, there's still sort of booming business going on. So from what I read, I only did read a little bit about the film afterwards. There definitely was that idea of whether it was just commentary or whether it was criticism of the economy and the bourgeoisie that was definitely some thought put into those particular characters and those sort of little snippets of scenes where it would point to that.
Yeah, last thing I kind of have to say on the film, just in the context of I think everything that's being said, is that Tati has this interesting thing, and y'all will see this throughout the rest of his films, assuming you can accept the challenge to go watch another one. But there's a sadness that runs through all of his stuff, which I find really interesting. Even at the end of Hulot's Holiday, he's sitting alone with the kids because none of the adults really sort of want it to be want anything to do with him. And there was this feeling of being an outsider and kind of being other than the mainstream society that runs through a lot of his films in different ways. So I think I don't think he was a fully like an overly joyous person, or at least he had a sadness to him that came through in a lot of his work, and I think it sort of snuck its way in here right at the end as well, even though it was a light-hearted kind of, maybe charming film.
Now, Chris, out of curiosity, since this was my first film of his, what would be your recommendation? If I'm not big on this, what would you recommend for me to get into him?
It's hard if you say you don't like comedy. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's tough. I like certain comedies. Just I'm very picky about them.
yeah, I mean, I would say his shorts. So if on the channel right now are a lot of his short films on the Criterion channel, and that might be great. I mean, just to Adam's point, if you don't like it, it's not a big investment. And if you start to dig what he does, then I would check out Playtime as kind of the one that I always point people to as maybe one of his more ambitious ones.
Okay.
People are going to talk about Mon Oncle as well, but for me, Playtime is like sort of from a great director doing his most ambitious work. It's probably Playtime.
Okay.
Cool. I suppose last point on this then before we sort of move on from it. It was just a question that you had brought up, Chris, and we were sort of talking about this beforehand. Who do we think the audience is for this film? Like, who would your target audience be?
I think it's really made for a period of time, right? I think it's made for French people coming out of the war, and he's looking for sympathy from the folks that were frustrated with the way the war was handled, or frustrated with maybe that kind of middle class that abandoned a lot of the uh, um, working class in France at that time.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of an interesting thing. We talk about a lot, like all these certain movies are timeless. That gets brought up with some of Buster Keaton's and some of Charlie Chaplin's stuff. You can still watch it today. And I think sometimes a lot of these type of movies do get overlooked. And I mean, it's makes sense. This isn't necessarily timeless, even if it did have something important to say. And I guess I'm not 100% sure I'm going with that, but it is interesting to watch because, most of the stuff you see is just this is timeless. This can work for any generation. And it's kind of interesting to see this snapshot in, even if it didn't always work for me, it is nice to see this snapshot of France after World War II and kind of their hardships even into that point.
And maybe Adam, I'd like to ask you too, with regards to the summer holiday. That's certainly people in the US will take a break during the summer, but I don't think there's really like a summer holiday in the way there is in Europe. Is that something that is pretty in the psyche in from Ireland? Is that something that's, people take advantage of?
Yeah, certainly, especially growing up. I luckily enough, I live 20, maybe 30 minutes in traffic from the beach. So, those kind of scenes were ones, I would have seen. Like the layout of the village is very similar to the sort of beach town that I would have gone to growing up. Which was kind of weird. You think I'd have maybe a bit of a nostalgia for this film seeing it, but I suppose maybe because I've been to it so much and I can go to the beach any old time, it doesn't really have a nostalgia for me. But yeah, summer holidays and especially growing up in school, and not so much now because obviously unless you're a teacher, summer holidays don't really exist anymore. It's just kind of like a week off whenever you can take it. But yeah, growing up, definitely summer holidays were like a huge thing, especially down, maybe smaller countries where you would pretty much go to the beach nearly any sunny day, which in Ireland is not very common. But any sunny day in the summer, you would go to the beach and you would see sort of similar scenes and everything like that. Like the one thing I did like about this film was that it's a piece of cinema that can really be enjoyed by all ages as well. Like I had mentioned this to a few guys in our Discord that, this is the kind of film where you can watch with your kids and you'll get different stuff out of it. Like obviously I don't have kids, but I could still get that from watching this where, you can enjoy the aspects of, like, say, if I had a hypothetical child that I was watching this with, I would obviously enjoy the cinematography and the camera work and the direction, and obviously my kid would enjoy the little gags. So, I think it's definitely as you were saying, it is almost timeless, and it's sort of not for one particular generation in one aspect. Obviously, in another aspect, it very much is an indictment of that particular post-war generation. But I think for now, just watching it as a film, taking it at face value, it can be enjoyed by people of all ages, which I always think is nice. Because you can't always sit down and watch like Videodrome with your 7-year-old. So it's always nice to
No,
have
I
these
think
kind
that's
of films
fine.
as
You
well.
can do that.
Spoken by two people that clearly don't have kids.
Yeah.
All right, so excited to talk to you about Collection Corner. So this is, depending on when you're listening, this is the last one that we're filming in 2020. So what I wanted to do today, and I checked with Adam and Zach ahead of time, was to do a recap of my favorite pickups of 2020. Because for me, this year was just crazy as somebody who tries to collect Blu-rays as much as I can. It just felt like every weekend there was a special or a new box set or just something nuts that was going and very expensive. So I put together a list because there was so much to talk about. But here's the ones that for me were the favorite of 2020, and I'm going to list them alphabetical by label, by boutique label, because there's just way too much to talk about. So here we go. So first of all, from AGFA, which if y'all don't know them, I think they might only be Region A, but they put out just really low budget films, but some fun ones. And they actually connected with a studio in Uganda called Hollywood and put out a box set of, or a small kind of box set of Hollywood super action movies, which is very exciting. Arbelos, I'm cheating a little bit. I bought it this year. It's not coming out till next year, but a nice, beautiful restoration of Seitan Tango. It's got to be top of any list. Arrow Academy for me is a tie between Cinema Paradiso, because it's one of my favorite films, and then The Apartment, because it's just a beautiful box set that they put out. Arrow Video proper is a limited edition of Battles Without Honor and Humanity, which if y'all haven't seen it, it's the Japanese Godfather series, or the Godfather of Japan, however you want to frame that. And they put out just a fantastic, beautiful limited edition. There's a new label called Cauldron Films that I don't really like, not a particular release. They only have 2 so far, but I just want to bring attention to them because the work they're doing is great. Criterion has to be the Essential Fellini. I'm just like, it's beautiful set, and that's what I'm going to be going through next year. Kino Lorber, it's got to be the Buster Keaton shorts box set that they have, or the Werner Herzog box set, both of which I found out about this year and quickly bought. Coming around the corner here to the end, Raro Video, they have a Hanging for Django, which I'm excited about. I love that series. I love the Django series of spaghetti westerns. Scream Factory, for me, I'm a little bit torn on them as a label, to be honest, because some of the releases I feel like are just kind of thrown together. But the Friday the 13th box set is just legendary, beautiful, perfect set for that. And then Severin put out the Al Adamson box set, which is perfect. I've already watched 2 or 3 there, and I'd already seen a few going in. Just I can't believe those films got that treatment. So congrats to Severin for that. Smaller label called Vestron Video put out Chopping Mall, which if you haven't seen it, everybody just stop what you're doing and watch Chopping Mall. It's fantastic as a cheesy kind of so bad it's good 80s horror film. And then the last one I could talk about, we could start a whole other podcast just on Vinegar Syndrome. I'm really falling in love with this label. Like I think they're perfect. I just everything. But as I had to break it down for the, I don't know, millions of viewers. What are we up to, Adam? Millions of viewers we have now, listeners of the podcast?
2 billion, I think.
2 billion? Yeah. You heard me talk about Action USA last week, so you know how excited I am for that. But otherwise, there's this little sleeper film called The Caller, which if you haven't seen it, it's wild. Like the last 5 minutes, the whole movie, you're like, how can they possibly wrap this up? And they do it. They pull it off, and it's this wonderful little film with Malcolm McDowell. So those are the 2 for that. So there we go. There's my rundown of 2020.
Nice. That's a lot of good pickups. I think you came into this segment a bit more prepared than me and Zach with our one film we're going to talk about, I'd say. What about you, Zach? What was your favorite pickup this year?
I had a few. One of probably my favorite was the Columbia Classics one that they came out. It was their 4K box set. Came out with Dr. Strangelove, Lawrence of Arabia, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Jerry Maguire, A League of Their Own, and Gandhi. It's a great set. I'm really excited to see what they do next. I'm hoping they'll do Taxi Driver in the next one. Beautifully put together sets, and all the transfers on them look fantastic. Lawrence of Arabia, it was worth it. I'm not even going to lie. I paid like $110 for this just to have Lawrence of Arabia on 4K. So probably spent too much, but it's okay. This didn't come out this year, but I got the Battle Royale from Arrow that I found cheap. So pretty happy with that one. I got Jackie Brown from South Korea. I actually don't know the label on this one. It's not important. It's somewhere in South Korea. A24 put out their Midsummer, which is a beautiful package. It barely fits on my bookshelf, but it really well put together. Wish it had special features or something, but it's 4K of Midsummer. And the Friday 13th box set, which Chris brought up, great set. Really glad I got my hands on it before it ends up being like $2,000 on eBay. And this one's a little bit of a cheat, but this is I got a custom of There Will Be Blood. Got it custom made for a steelbook. Wow. So that's been my favorites for the year, at least from what I could see by glancing at my shelf.
I'm so jealous of your Friday the 13th sets. I'm still looking at my Friday the 13th DVD collection that I got it has to be at least 12 years ago now at this stage. They're still in good condition.
Does it have all of them, or do they have to split them up because of like rights?
It has all of them apart from Jason Goes to Hell, which wasn't even available in Region B or Region 2, I suppose, for DVD. So I had to, I'm talking about like 10 years ago now, I had to order an import of it and buy a region-free DVD player, which were very cheap because it was only DVD. Just to watch that one film, and it doesn't have Freddy versus Jason either, but it has all of them up until then, which I didn't mind, because I'd never even really watched them before. I just wanted to have.
That's a lot of money to spend on Jason Goes to Hell.
No, like this 10 years ago on DVD. This was not a lot of money. Trust me. I think I picked it up on. I think my dad even picked it up on eBay for like I don't know, like $10 or something like that. It was not a lot of money, but I'm very jealous of your sets. Obviously, I wish we would get some kind of Region B release, but I assume rights are an issue with that. So my favorite, well, definitely my favorite pickup of the year, I might talk about one or two more if they can spring into my head, but my absolute favorite pickup of the year was Criterion's release, and it definitely wasn't released this year as far as I'm aware, but I picked it up this year, of Kiarostami's Coker trilogy. Those films, I watched all 3 pretty much back to back over the summer, and I fell in love with the films and Kiarostami. They were my first Kiarostami films after hearing so much about him. I just went out and bought the set because the films are just incredible and I wanted to be able to own them. And the one thing that really blew me away, other than the films, obviously, is the actual packaging itself. I don't know if you guys own the Coker trilogy or if you've ever seen the packaging, but for viewers who don't know about the Coker trilogy, they're a very meta trilogy. each film was like a film within a film. So, the first film is just, a normal film. In the second film, they're going to find the child actor who was in the first film. And the third film is about making the second film. So it's a very meta trilogy, and the box set perfectly encapsulates that by having each disc in a digipack within another disc, almost like a Russian doll style packaging, where each disc is packed within another. So
Brilliant.
perfect packaging to perfectly encapsulate the trilogy, and that was my favorite pickup of the year by far. Did have some other great ones. I discovered Indicator this year, who put out some okay individual releases. I'm not really the biggest fan of individual releases, but their box sets are just knockouts. I picked up both the William Castle sets with all of his schlocky great films. I got the Sam Fuller at Columbia set, and I got really into Sam Fuller this year. And I talked about it on the last podcast, but their new Columbia Noir series that they're going to be putting out. I got volume 1 of that, and volume 2 will be out in February. I've only actually managed to watch one film, and I'm not going to lie, just as I anticipated, it was bad. But it was fun. It was fun, but it wasn't really a great film. So I have big respect for Indicator as well. So definitely Indicator, some Indicator buys, and Coker Trilogy were my favorite pickups of the year.
Was that?
Go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, with the Coker Trilogy, was that when you changed your avatar on Reddit to Kiarostami on the Criterion?
I changed that. I changed that so often. I changed that so. It was Kiarostami for a while, and then I actually changed it when that Czech New Wave collection came out.
Mm-hmm.
I just bombed through all of those, and then I changed it to Czech New Wave for a while, and then I was getting too many questions about Czech New Wave off people, and I didn't really know the answers. I'm like, I better change this to something else. I can't really have these people asking me these questions. I don't know the answers. They're like asking for Rex, and I'm like, just go watch the collection. That's what I did. So that's when I changed it back to Kiarostami, because I'd much prefer someone ask me a question about his films than some random Czech New Wave films who I can't even remember the director's name, but I know the film was cool.
Well, thank you for showing me that Coker trilogy, so I can go blow some more money before Christmas. I appreciate it.
Honestly, it's so worth it, just for the packaging alone. You can watch the film you can watch all three of them on the channel if you just want to watch the films, but the packaging is just a knockout. I wasn't even expecting it when I got it. I didn't really know what to expect of the packaging, and at first I was really confused when I opened the digipack, and it was like a fat digipack, and I'm like, there's only one film in here. And then it started to slide apart, and I'm like, oh my god, the slide! I was very surprised and very happy. It was really, really great packaging.
I like when Criterion does that. Sorry, just real quick on this. That made me think of Criterion starting to do more Easter eggs in their releases. If anybody listening has the Lone Wolf and Cub box set from Criterion, and you haven't checked in the spine yet, do it. It's I won't spoil it, but check in the spine of the box. It's a fun surprise.
I wish I could right now, Chris. I'm very annoyed that you brought up Lone Wolf and Cub because I ordered it from Zavi on Black Friday and it still ain't here.
Okay, there's no excuse. I mean, in the warehouse, probably like 20 miles from your house.
I've already emailed them. They're like, "Oh, we assume it's lost at this point. Here's your money back." And I'm like, "Oh, well, that's great. You gave me back my $25. Now I've got to go spend double that to actually buy the set again at full price." So thanks, Zavi. I'm hoping it will still show up. They just said they assume it's lost. See, it's coming from the UK to Ireland, so things get a little bit dicey sometimes. Because especially the UK postal service is pretty dire. Their Royal Mail. So once it gets to Ireland, it nearly always gets to me in great condition. It's getting it to Ireland is normally the problem. They said it was dispatched, and they said they assume it's lost, so they gave me my money back. But
hey, it could still show up.
Maybe there'll be a Christmas miracle. Maybe there'll be a Christmas miracle, and I'll get it for free.
If you want to put your home address here on the podcast, maybe somebody will send it to you.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
If you want to put your home address here on the podcast, maybe somebody will send it to you.
Oh yes, of course.
I'm waiting on Royal Mail to send me the Devil's DVD. So I'm sure it'll never show up, but we're giving it a shot.
Look, I just keep your hope up. You never know, or just pretend it's lost, like I'm going to do it with Lone Wolf, and then if it shows up, it's a great day.
Well, I ordered it 2 weeks ago, and they said it could be here about March. I'm like, okay, well, I'll forget about it by then.
What label was that? Was that just a BFI release?
BFI, yeah, because Warner Brothers refuses to release the Devils uncut and on Blu-ray. They just refuse. It's their Song of the South, basically.
It's kind of crazy when you think that, BFI will release it no problem. I've never seen the film, so I can't really talk about what's stopping it content wise. But I just think it's funny that BFI will release that uncut no problem, but the US no.
Well,
Whereas
even BFI is not uncut. It's
oh, is it
actually
not?
missing the raping of Christ is the name of the scene, which
Oh
is
God.
probably be a big reason why
Oh,
Warner
lovely.
Brothers wants nothing to do with it. But they have
Oh.
attempted to. It's about the most uncut you can get now. That's not.
Sorry.
That doesn't look horrible.
I was gonna say I'm just surprised that that they'll show this, but yet they won't allow an uncut release of Come and See. But now that you talk about it, that's I can understand why.
The second you say the name of the scene, everybody's like, "Oh, okay, I got you." Never mind.
We understand now.
All right, and now we're going to talk about Revengeance.
Ooh, can't wait.
Who wants to start?
I am starting. I'm
okay,
starting
good.
Revengeance, because I just need to get this film off my chest. Revengeance. Okay, I'm gonna try and not be too overtly critical, and I'm definitely gonna try and not make this an explicit podcast. This film is so terrible, and this is me being nice about it. This film is so bad, and I really wanted to like it. I was watching it. I was kind of getting into it. I was the animation style, I'm sure we'll talk about a bit more, is very abrasive. It's definitely not it's not a Disney film in terms of its animation quality. Now, I don't know enough about Bill Plimpton to really talk about that too much, because for all I know, this is like his signature style, and if he changed it any way, there would be absolute uproar with all the people who live in their basements and watch these films all day, because I'm sure they're pretty much his only fans. But for me, yeah, it's like the animation style is what it is. I'm not gonna dump on that too much. If that's your style, that's your style. Kudos to you for sticking to it. Fair play, all that. It's the writing for me of this film. The writing and just the story is just dreadful. It's the kind of film I was watching it. I was thinking this is kind of cool. It's kind of like maybe I think someone mentioned it in their review. It's sort of like a grindhouse, kind of like if you'd expect maybe if this is a live action film, be like produced by Quentin Tarantino, that kind of style, like sort of B movie exploitation throwback. And I kind of got into it, and there's the awful ending, which I'll talk about at some point. But there's that awful ending, and it just left a really sour taste in my mouth. And I was kind of thinking about the film afterwards and just sort of rethinking the plot. And I just thought that this is just nonsense. It's just rubbish. It's the kind of stuff you would write as like a 15-year-old. It's the kind of thing like some edgy YouTuber, and it looks like it was animated by a 15-year-old YouTuber as well. But again, it's kind of like, for me, it was kind of like something that it was put together by a bunch of kids who thought they were being cool and edgy, and obviously it's very immature. Yeah, for me, this is a big dud of a film. I did not like the animation. I did not like the story. I especially did not like its awful, awful ending. Now I'm gonna listen to you guys talk about how much you like it, and I'll just sit in the corner quiet now.
Zach, you go first. I actually don't know what you think about it.
Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of your spot, Chris. I'm not going to exactly defend this film, but I definitely liked it a tad bit more than Adam did. You were completely right. The story is terrible. It's and I think I'll get through my issues with it. Probably the biggest issue I have with it is there are obvious jokes in the film, and almost none of them land. None of them. Like, you can sit there and say, yeah, okay. Like, I'll give the best example I can that just annoyed me. It got under my skin. There's like 2 instances where the main character, Rossi, like, as quoted in the film, screams like a girl. And okay, that's the joke. I got it. And then they pointed out, not once, but twice, that was the joke. And it's like, I don't think that's how you write that, even though it's not a good joke anyway. But okay, sure. But the whole movie's kind of like that. Like, none of the jokes really land particularly. I guess the reason that I, at least at the end of it, didn't have a completely negative opinion of it by the end was it goes back to that 90s era of Ren and Stimpy or Rocko's Modern Life, which is Rocko's Modern Life's definitely more polished, but it has that sort of charm, if you want to call it that, to it. essentially it's just not as well written as either one of those cartoons were, and that's really where it's going to fall apart. Um, and I guess the closest comparison to slightly modern I can come up with was Rob Zombie released that the Super Haunted World of El Super Beasto. I probably completely butchered that title, but it's something around there where he tried to do the exact same thing. And I would actually say this one's a little bit more successful in its own way, just for at least feeling like a 90s cartoon. And even the end, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, kind of a little bit of a controversial end, does feel like it'd be something pulled straight out of the 90s, because people weren't quite as PC about that. And they were kind of, we don't look too great in the 90s when we talk about that sort of thing. So it does sort of fit. If you were just to say this came out in the 90s, I would believe you.
Cool. Well, so here's the correct opinion of the film. No. Look, everything y'all said, I get. And I'm not going to say that it was a masterpiece. And I'm probably going to get a lot of hate mail here from this, so I'm not going to put my personal address on the internet. But when Charlie Kaufman, are y'all familiar with him, the writer, director, of course, right? Yeah. When he made Synecdoche, New York, I was pissed. And I know people love it and it's his masterpiece, whatever. I was pissed. I hated it because I felt like he had this unbelievable mind, and like that was the product of him getting zero creative sort of boundaries and control. And I just thought it was a mess and I hate it. So that's where I think I'm going to get a lot of hate mail, because I know people think it's like his best film. We can talk about that next podcast if we want to watch that and talk about it, because I haven't seen it in a long time. Maybe I like it. But the reason I'm talking about Synecdoche, New York here is because I think it's the same thing with Bill Plimpton. So Bill Plimpton was like famous for MTV. A lot of the projects that he kind of, his first earlier films had a lot more creative constraint. And I think he works well in that environment where there's other opinions kind of reining him in and not letting him go just full Plimpton, right? And in addition to that, you also had the introduction of Jim Lujan, which I don't really know much about him. And it did feel like it was a rookie script in that sense, right? Like I've tried writing a script. It's awful. It's awful. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And I'm really glad it never got made. It's hard. Like I think it takes like practice, and it feels like maybe this was his first one. So I think like I'm not going to argue with some of the points that y'all are making around it feeling like immature and stuff like that. But here's why I like it. If you take the Bill Plimpton style, basically what he's done throughout his sort of career is take regular everyday life and present it in like the most extreme kind of caricature version of that thing, right? Like that's sort of his style. Is he's going to say like, if you're going to have two people eating dinner, they're going to wind up eating like each other's foot, or like instead of eating like a piece of ham, they're going to actually take a bite out of the pig, or like whatever. Like he's going to go for like whatever's in you know what you would expect from a normal scene, and like really make it this kind of extreme version of it, right? That's his sense of humor. And so I think it was consistent with his style, with the characters, and like he had a lot of these kind of, you know, cliches of sort of like, either, I hate to use the word noir because you know that gives it a certain like weightiness that I don't think y'all would attach to this film, but like it has, you know, like he goes after these characters of like a crime film, and he has like the extreme version of them, right? Here is represented. And I liked it. Like I'm not going to defend it, say it was a masterpiece, but I liked it in the sense that it was a Plimpton style film, good animation for his style. I think good voiceovers. Like I had no problem with the voiceovers. You know, and you know, it felt like something from that era. And I think this is where I'm going to defend him, and this is where I think we might disagree the most, and that's totally fine. But I think the ending, is it okay if we spoil it? Like, can we talk about the ending?
Oh, I'm going to talk about the ending.
Okay. So I think that's awesome. I think the ending was not Plimpton saying it's bad to be gay as a man. I think he was saying like the characters in this film that are straight out of the 90s, macho WWE style, like characters, would have an issue if they found out that their hero, their like testosterone driven hero, had a tape where he was playing, like dancing around in sort of like a feminine way with this guy who was supposed to be another sort of macho like boss that was driving like the puppet master sort of for this whole movement. And he was sort of, he created that ending to go in keeping with the feel with that feeling of how they would respond to that. And he doesn't mind creating controversy because he finances these films through Kickstarter, and he can kind of be a little bit edgy and a little bit, uncomfortable. And the last thing I'll say, because I, want this is open discussion here, but like maybe he got stuck in the 90s a little bit. Like that's where he was successful. That's where he was kind of on top, and like maybe he never matured out of it. Like that's certainly a possibility here too.
One thing that I kind of felt the whole time I was watching this, just because there's kind of like these weird plot points in it. Like there's that cult, the entire like what does that take up, like 10, 12 minutes of the whole movie is like about this cult. It almost felt like this was supposed to be like a pilot movie or pilot episode or 2 or 3 episodes in a season, and it was almost like, well, I don't have the money to do that. Let me just slice all this together, get this whole arc done, because it does have an arc. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It's just kind of got like weird moments where you're like, oh, well, we need a fill-in episode, so let's just have them get captured by a cult at this moment. And they were just kind of like, well, it's animated, it's done, throw it in there, it'll somehow make some sort of sense at the end. But that's kind of the feeling I got, and I think that's why some of it kind of feels a little too long. Like, I actually agree with a lot of what you're saying, Chris. I think it really just comes down to a lot of the jokes not landing for me like I wish they did. But I do feel like it's a little too long, and that's kind of saying something when the movie's, 70 minutes long?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel like it should have been like 40
yeah.
or 45, and I don't think I would have felt as exhausted by the end of it. And I think I actually probably would have had a little bit more of a positive feeling towards the end if it was like a 45-minute short.
So what you're basically saying is, because of all these extra plot points, it's basically like a bad Mulholland Drive.
Yeah, I would say that's kind of accurate.
Yeah, like again, just on the ending, I completely see where you're coming from in regards to subverting that 90s macho man sort of vibe. I think for me, what made it homophobic and what made it offensive and extremely immature was not necessarily the reveal, but its execution and its reaction by other characters that would just be sort of standby characters. So like the one part that's really like, okay, like, if you're gonna try and show a macho man as being homosexual, you're gonna try and give him the antithesis. You're gonna try and make him the most effeminate homosexual possible. Okay, I don't agree with what you're doing, but I see where you're coming from with this. But at what point do you need to have the newscaster say, we're going to turn this sex tape off now because I don't want to get sick? That's where the line comes in for me, where that's just unnecessary. You're pointing towards maybe this being so, like sickening. And this is just a newscaster. They're not involved in the plot. And they're saying, oh, we're going to turn off this gay sex tape now because I don't want to puke on live air. That for me is where it became more of an issue. Like, I see what you mean about, subverting that sort of macho man expectation. And I kind of see why they went with it so effeminate, because it really is the antithesis of what? Deathface. I couldn't remember the name of the character's name. Deathface. He is seen as this big macho man, gravelly voice character. It is the antithesis. So if you're going to try and, flip the sort of view of that character, that's how you do it. But when you get characters talking about how this is sort of sick and gross, that's where, for me, it kind of takes the cake.
That's honestly a pretty big hole in my argument, because if the newscaster is saying it's sick, then that's supposed to be the objective voice and not the voice of his fans, right? So I don't know. I don't really have anything to say to that. That might make me rethink my position a little bit. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Yeah.
Well, the only thing, I guess, for me, because I agree with what you're saying, Adam, I do think he went a little too far with it and tried to get into the mind of how it was in the 90s, from what I remember. And I kind of touched on it a little bit. I don't know if either of you guys watched Friends back in like the 90s and the 2000s. I don't know how popular it was in Ireland. And there is a point to this, but essentially one of the like long-term jokes of this was one of the main characters' father was a transsexual, and it was used as a joke almost for 10 years. And that was kind of something that was very common in the 90s. Like that was used as a butt of a joke. It's not to say that's okay or they should have done that. But I guess that kind of goes back to the point of, if this was put in the 90s, I guess you'd probably look at it a lot different than you would look at it now, where when you look at it in a 2020 lens, it's very, you probably shouldn't have went that far. If it was looked at in 1992, you'd be like, okay, yeah, I got it, cool.
Yeah,
and it's not a defense for it. If I'm trying to get in the headspace of, he's trying to nostalgia the 90s and maybe try to get the essence of what the 90s was, I guess you would. I'm not saying you would have to, but I could see why he'd be like, yeah, let's put that in there, because that was a common joke then. And like Chris said, maybe he just never matured out of that. And it could be a very good point, not to defend it, just to maybe from his point of view, that's why it was put in there like that, to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, because it's all well and good to say, oh, this is a kind of joke that would have gone in the 90s. The film was made 4 years ago. So, it's not like we're talking about a 90s film retroactively. That would be a whole different conversation.
Right, of course.
If that was the case. Yeah, again, I don't know enough about Bill Plimpton to say if he's stuck in the 90s. I honestly had never heard of him until his collection came onto the channel. I'd never heard of the man. Maybe he's just more of a, because obviously, what we would have seen on MTV and stuff over here in Ireland was more UK based rather than America based. So I would not have seen a lot of the stuff that you guys would have seen growing up. So I had no prior sort of history with Bill Plimpton. So again, it could absolutely, I could be absolutely misreading it, and he's like a proper like gay rights advocate. I could be completely misreading it, but that was just what I took from it.
Well, I definitely agree that even if his intention wasn't how it comes off, it was definitely executed not the way it should have ever been executed. Like you said, the newscaster part's really what kind of hurts it a lot.
Yeah.
There's another kind of underlying question here that I think I'd love to hear from you, although I think I know what you're going to say. Why this film, right? Why make this film? Because I think that, he's this big independent. I think some people even call him the godfather of indie animation. I could be off, but I think I've heard that label for him before. So a lot of his stuff is self-financed. He goes and makes commercials to finance the films that he wants. And of all the films that he's made, I think my biggest critique of this film, if I'm being totally honest, and kind of joining y'all's side for a second, is I could never really find the why for this. Like, it didn't feel like a personal story for him. It felt like he was trying to make a grindhouse picture, and maybe didn't really have a strong voice in that genre. Maybe shouldn't have. I could never get the why. I thought it was a fun film, but and I wanted to defend it just because you hated it so much. But I probably won't watch it again. Honestly, I don't think I ever got the reason really, the why for this. So I'd love to hear y'all's thought on that.
Well, I'm not sure. I'll agree with you. I don't think he has an insanely strong voice in a noir setting, though I will say the animation at night, when it was more like silhouette figures and stuff, I actually thought that was some of the stronger stuff in the whole movie. And I thought it was it was a lot easier on the eyes than a lot of the in color stuff, which it's his style. So fair to him. And I still like it's a little charming no matter what, but the why he made it, he got me, to be honest. Like, I don't feel like he had like a strong love for wrestling. I think he used it as a cool plot point. I don't think he was super into noir. I don't know his backstory, but no, it almost just seemed like he just wanted to do it to do it. Maybe he just wanted a Ren Stimpy thing. I don't know.
I'm gonna give Bill the benefit of the doubt and say it was all Jim Lujan's idea.
There you go. There you go.
God damn you, Jim, and your 42 credits on IMDb.
He's almost got as many credits as reviews as this movie does on IMDb.
I'm sorry if you're listening to this, Jim.
Podcast, no less. Maybe we can get Jim on next time to defend his position.
I'll reach out. That's actually not a bad idea. You know what? I'm saying it half jokingly, but I will reach out to Jim. I feel like he probably doesn't have a lot of followers. I'm sure if he heard we were just sitting here talking crap about his movie, he might want to come on and defend his position a bit. I'll reach out to him on Twitter and see what he says.
It'd be kind of cool actually to talk to him, to hear what he has to say.
I would be interested to hear his his side of the story. I suppose I would be interested to hear, he will answer the why and maybe sort of account for some of the dicier parts of the film. I would be interested to hear his side of the story. So now we're into our final segment, which is called Any Other Business. So we're just going to talk about some stuff that we watched recently, just a film or a show or something that we thought was really cool. We want to give a shout out. I'm going to go first this time, guys, if you don't mind. I watched this film yesterday in prep for what I'm going to watch next week, because I'm off work all of next week, and it's the first time I've had an extended period off work for a while. And I got Kobayashi's The Human Condition trilogy on Blu-ray last week. And I'm thinking, like, these are 3-hour-long films each. When am I going to have the time to crack into these? So I'm going to crack into these next week. I'm going to watch one a day because, I want to be able to make it a bit more cohesive without watching other stuff in between. So in prep for that, I watched the Kobayashi film that I already owned on Blu-ray, but I hadn't actually watched. And this is Kwaidan. Kwaidan is it's like a ghost anthology film. I don't really want to call it a horror film because it's not really all that scary, but it's definitely spooky. It has a big connection with Ireland, because, which you wouldn't expect from a Japanese movie, but the collection of short stories that Kwaidan is based on was actually gathered by an Irishman who went and lived in Japan, Lafcadio O'Hearn, who has a Japanese gardens named after him in a city that's only about 20 minutes away from me. So I heard about that and I just had to jump into it. And obviously in prep for The Human Condition, Kwaidan's 1 3-hour film, but it's split up into 4 stories. Seemed like a really good way to jump into this. And the film is just incredible. I don't know if you guys have seen Kwaidan, but I would highly recommend it. It's just absolutely gorgeous. It's all done on sound stages with hand-painted backdrops. If you think like Black Narcissus, those kind of hand-painted sort of backgrounds of like the sky and stuff. It's so meticulously well put together. Some stories are stronger than others. Some people most associate the Hoichi, the earless, the one with you probably see him on the posters with the Japanese writing on his face. That story is probably the most well associated with the film, but it was actually my least favorite of the 4, funnily enough. I went on a bit too long, but the 4 stories are all great in their own way. They all have their own, each sort of individual atmosphere and feeling, and they're all self-encapsulated, and they all sort of take place, although it's all on the same soundstage, they all take place in very different sort of locations, and especially the second story, which is all very snowy. The opening to that is incredible as these 2 guys trudge through this blizzard. But that film was really great, and seeing Kobayashi's style, definitely really excited to watch The Human Condition next week. I'm gonna be getting into all of those. But yeah, Kwaidan, I would highly recommend it. I got obviously Criterion didn't release it here, and I was reading about this, and I think Criterion only have it on DVD. I don't know if they've released it on Blu-ray yet in Region A, but Eureka Masters of Cinema did a limited edition release during the summer in this nice big thick digipack with a really cool booklet that includes the short stories that were featured in the film. Although I have the book separate, but all the short stories, this one features the ones that are included with the film, and it was limited edition. They just have a standard Blu-ray out now. But actually, sorry, I'm mixing that up. Human Condition has a Blu-ray. Human Condition doesn't have a Blu-ray release from Criterion. Kwaidan does, as far as I'm aware. Human Condition actually is not the one with the Blu-ray. But yeah, I'm looking forward to Human Condition next week, and Kwaidan was a really, really great film if you haven't seen it.
I guess the one I'd like to recommend is a 2010 Hong Kong film, Dream Home. A little bit of background for kind of why this movie was made. The housing market in Hong Kong is pretty atrocious. People have a hard time finding flats to live in affordably. Their housing market is completely trash. People save up their whole life just to get a pretty small flat. And so basically what the film does is it is essentially a slasher movie. It's a Hong Kong slasher movie. And it intercuts these 2 main stories of the girl going on this basically hour-long rampage in this housing complex she was not allowed to buy for various reasons. And it intercuts with her struggles and kind of doesn't justify why she does what she does, but it kind of it's very different of, unlike a lot of slasher styles of here's the initial kill, here's the meat bags we're going to see get killed for an hour and a half, and there's the end. This one is more in the perspective of her and why the person would go on to this length and why they would go to this much carnage and rampage. It's a very bloody film. It's very violent. One thing but I do think this structure was both helpful and harmful to it, in the sense that it was necessary so we could understand why she would go to this length, but where it kind of loses itself is it's a lot of flashbacks within flashbacks, and the structure kind of falls apart a little bit in parts of it. But I do think it is an interesting talking point from a lot of struggles that they're dealing with in Hong Kong now. And when this film came out in 2008 with the housing crisis that they were having, just like the US was. And I think the hardest thing that people have with this film that I've noticed is it kind of has that Serbian film problem where it may have something deeper to say, but it's so lost in its violence and its blood that you were almost like, was that really the point at the end of the day? But if you're looking for a fun slasher movie, it's one of the better ones I've seen in the last few years. I don't think Hong Kong movies get enough credit for some of the great stuff that they put out and some of the very interesting stuff they put out. So that's one I'd recommend if people can find a copy of it.
Is it as intense as a Serbian film?
No. It definitely has good gore and blood and stuff like that, but it never goes to that length.
Okay. So for mine, it's just total coincidence, but I think it kind of actually ties into the discussion we were having with Revengeance a little bit. So it's a movie by John Ford. Bear with me because there's not much that's going to connect those two ever. But it's from 1920, let's call it 26. Apologies if I'm off by a year or two, but it's called Three Bad Men. And there's a lot of actually sort of characters that are very similar to Hidden Fortress characters. I think it actually, from a story perspective, I would be shocked if Kurosawa didn't pull a little bit from this, because it's a woman who's kind of supported by this gang of misfits who turns out to have a heart of gold, and it's a well-made movie. Like, it's a good story and it's interesting and it has to do with the gold rush in the U.S., but it is super racist. Like, and it's even more apparent that it's racist because it has intertitles that like show how racist it is. And it's just uncomfortable, right? Like, there's this tension, I think, with these movies that were made in the 20s and then maybe even in 2016 in Bill Plimpton's case. But like some of these older movies where, like, what do you do with that as a viewer? Like, I think, I don't know, I'm kind of wrestling with that a little bit. Like, it's a good movie, right? Like, it's a sweet story about these three, criminals that find themselves and find a redemptive story through this woman who, basically her dad dies right before this gold rush happens, and they sort of take her under her wing, and like there's never any ill intent towards this young woman from them. They're just like three father figures to her, and they do a great job. Like, it's like Three Men and a Baby, sort of, except not at all. But you never feel anything but like a paternal love towards this young woman, and it's really sweet. And at the same time, there's just incredibly direct, oppressive racism towards specifically Italians and Spaniards and Chinese people. I don't know. I don't know what, it's interesting. I don't really know what to do with that, but it's really got me kind of thinking about it. Watching Revengeance and then this, just by coincidence, so close together, has made me kind of be, I've been wrestling with this the last few days.
Well, I don't know how popular Gone with the Wind is in Ireland for Adam, but I guess for me and you, Chris, that's something we're kind of seeing with Gone with the Wind, right? Like the idea of where do you put the separation? Is it just as easy as saying, well, that was just part of the time, and still putting it as, can you put it in your list of greatest movies of all time? Can you do that and still separate, like, yeah, there was some problematic stuff 70, 80 years ago for sure.
Yeah, actually, funnily enough, I only watched Gone with the Wind pretty recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah. My girlfriend made me watch it, and I actually pretty much enjoyed it for the most part. I thought it was a good film. Again, another film with really gorgeous backdrops and set design. But Yeah, there's a lot of problematic stuff, and we could probably spend an hour talking about the pros and cons of taking films, as products of their time. But yeah, sometimes I get you. It's definitely uncomfortable, when you watch older stuff, and it is very overtly, racist or what, homophobic or whatever it may be. It can leave a sour taste in your mouth sometimes, but I always, for me, I always try and just sort of take it either, well, for talking about a particular film that maybe has dicey moments, but for the most part, it's not actually really it's not like a film about racists. There just happens to be racist moments. I tend to try and take those films, as products of their time. Same with something like a Roman Polanski film or a Woody Allen film.
Oh.
I'm gonna just take those as the film. I'm gonna try and separate the art from the artist there. And I always try and do that, unless you have something like, Intolerance, where it's literally just KKK guys were riding around for 3 hours,
Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation, not Intolerance. My apologies. It was whatever D.W. Griffith film it was, where it's just all about how great the KKK are. That's another story altogether. And I suppose even then, some films can have their artistic merits more so than their moral merits. But so we could do a whole other podcast on that one, I would say. And that wraps up this week's episode of They Live by Film. You can catch me, Chris, and Zach on our Letterboxd or Reddit accounts, the links of which will be in the description. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at They Live by Film. Until next time, take care.